welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. The metallic taste hit my tongue first. Sharp, acrid, wrong. I spat and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand as I descended the concrete steps into Treatment Bay Alpha. The morning air down here usually carried the clean scent of chlorine and ozone from the filtration systems. Instead, I breathed in something that made my sinuses burn. My boots splashed through what should have been dry flooring. I stopped, staring at the inch-deep brine pooling around the primary intake manifolds. The liquid wasn't the clear, processed water that belonged here. This was murky, crystalline residue clinging to every surface it touched like some parasitic coating. What the hell? I muttered, pulling out my tablet to check the overnight monitoring logs. Every sensor reading from 3 a.m. onward showed the same impossible data. Sodium chloride concentrations spiking beyond measurement parameters. Salt levels that should have triggered every alarm in the facility. But I hadn't heard any alarms. No emergency calls.
No automatic notifications.
I keyed my radio. Control, this is Selim. I'm seeing massive contamination in Treatment Bay Alpha. Are you showing any system alerts? Static crackled back at me. Then Bellamy's voice, tight with confusion. Selim, I'm not showing alerts for Alpha Bay. All green lights up here. The lie of those green lights became obvious as I moved deeper into the treatment area. The main filtration array, 6 massive cylindrical units that could process 2 million gallons per hour, sat silent. Their normally pristine stainless steel surfaces were already pitted with tiny holes where the salt brine had begun its corrosive work. Crystalline deposits clung to every bolt, every joint, every surface like metallic snow. I crouched beside the nearest filter housing and ran my fingers along the base. The metal felt rough, eaten. These units were designed to last decades. This level of corrosion should have taken years, not hours. My tablet chimed with an incoming message. I glanced down to see the photograph I kept as my background. The municipal water tower with serving 180,000 residents, painted in blue letters across its side. Below it, my certification as Chief Water Treatment Engineer. Both reminders of who depended on these systems working. A bubbling sound made me look up. One of the secondary processing tanks was overflowing, salt-heavy water cascading over its rim onto the floor. The overflow drains, clogged with crystalline buildup, couldn't handle the volume. As I watched, more brine seeped from joints I'd personally inspected just last week. Joints that had been tight, sealed, perfect. This wasn't equipment failure. This was catastrophic breach. I climbed onto the observation platform to get a better view of the entire treatment bay. From up here, the scope of the disaster became clear. Every major system showed signs of salt intrusion. The biological treatment tanks were already showing die-off. The carefully maintained bacterial colonies that cleaned our water were being poisoned by salinity levels that should have been impossible. The radio crackled again. Selim, I'm getting reports from the city water monitoring stations. They're showing pressure drops across the entire distribution network. Pressure drops meant we weren't producing enough treated water to meet demand. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. Peak usage wouldn't hit for another hour when the morning rush began. If we were already dropping pressure, I tried to calculate in my head. The city maintained a 24-hour emergency reserve in the elevated storage tanks. Under normal consumption, that would buy us time. But if people started hoarding water, filling bathtubs, stockpiling bottles, that reserve could drain in hours. Bellamy, what's our current output capacity? I asked into the radio. A pause. Then, according to the monitors, we're at 85% normal capacity. I stared at the silent filtration array below me. We weren't at 85% capacity. We weren't at any capacity. Whatever the monitors were showing, they weren't connected to reality. The smell down here was getting stronger. Not just the metallic tang of salt, but something else. Something organic and wrong. I followed my nose toward the primary settling tanks and found the source. The tanks weren't just contaminated with salt water, they were full of it. Brine so concentrated that nothing could live in it. The surface showed an oily sheen that caught the overhead lights like a mirror. But where had it come from? Our intake systems drew from the regional aquifer through sealed, tested pipelines. Saltwater intrusion was theoretically possible, but the geological surveys showed bedrock separation between our freshwater sources and any saline formations. My tablet buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check the auxiliary intake line. 3rd sublevel. The message had to be from Delphine. Environmental compliance would have access to the complete facility blueprints. But why send a cryptic message instead of calling directly? And how did she know I was down here investigating? I made my way to the service elevator, my boots crunching through salt crystals that hadn't been there yesterday. The elevator groaned as it descended to the 3rd sublevel, a section I rarely visited, housing the backup systems and emergency protocols we'd hopefully never need. The auxiliary intake line was exactly where the message said it would be. A secondary pipeline, supposedly sealed and inactive, that could theoretically supplement our primary water supply in extreme circumstances. But the valve housing was open, corroded almost beyond recognition, and salt brine was pouring through it like an open wound. Someone had deliberately opened this line. Recently, the valve will still showed clean metal where hands had gripped it, contrasting sharply with the corroded surfaces everywhere else. I knelt in the ankle-deep brine and examined the valve mechanism more closely. These weren't standard municipal parts. The valve had been retrofitted with components I didn't recognize, industrial-grade, expensive, designed for high-pressure applications. This wasn't jury-rigged equipment. This was professional sabotage. My radio buzzed. "Selim, where are you? I'm showing some kind of contamination alert now, but the system won't tell me what kind." The bitter irony hit me. Our monitoring systems could detect contamination but couldn't identify it. They could measure flow rates but couldn't tell us our filters were destroyed. They could show green lights while our entire facility was being poisoned. I stood up, brine dripping from my pants, salt crystals grinding under my boots. The auxiliary line was still pouring contamination into our system. Every minute I spent down here was another few thousand gallons of municipal water supply destroyed. But shutting off this valve wouldn't solve anything. The damage was already spreading through every pipe, every tank, every filter in the facility. The salt brine was eating our infrastructure from the inside out. I climbed back toward the main treatment level, my mind racing through emergency protocols. We needed to isolate the contaminated sections, reroute through backup systems, contact the State Environmental Emergency Office. We needed to do about 50 things simultaneously, and we needed to do them perfectly, and we needed to do them now. The city was going to wake up in an hour expecting clean water from their taps. Instead, they were going to get nothing. Or worse, they were going to get poison. As I reached the main level, I could see that the situation was deteriorating faster than I'd imagined. What had been inch-deep puddles 20 minutes ago were now small rivers of brine flowing across the treatment bay floor. The air itself was becoming thick with salt mist, making it hard to breathe. Soon, it would be unsafe for anyone to work down here without protective equipment we didn't have. I keyed the radio one more time. "Bellamy, we need to evacuate the treatment bays and activate emergency protocols. This isn't a contamination event. This is deliberate sabotage causing complete system failure." The response crackled back through increasing static. "Selim, what do you mean sabotage? And I've got another problem. I just got word that Oren is on the way down from the county facility. Apparently, there's been some kind of coordination order from the state I wasn't told about." Oren. My jaw tightened. I hadn't worked with him since the budget hearings 6 months ago, when his efficiency recommendations had nearly resulted in my entire maintenance crew being cut in half. Now he was coming here to my facility, during the worst crisis I'd ever faced. The timing felt like more than coincidence. I looked back at the devastated treatment bay, then at my tablet showing that photo of the water tower. 180,000 people depending on systems that were dying by the minute. The salt brine was winning, eating through decades of infrastructure faster than I could even assess the damage. The taste of salt was so strong now I could barely swallow. And somewhere above ground, the morning rush was about to begin. People would turn on their taps expecting clean water, and instead they'd get nothing. Or worse, the elevator lurched to a stop at the main level, and through the open doors I could see Oren's silhouette against the morning light streaming through the facility's entrance. Even from 50 feet away, his posture radiated that familiar mix of confidence and condescension that had made our last collaboration so unbearable. He carried an aluminum briefcase in one hand and some kind of specialized monitoring device in the other, equipment I didn't recognize. "Selim!" His voice echoed across the treatment bay as he approached, his boots splashing through the expanding pools of brine without any apparent concern. State emergency coordination sent me as soon as the automated alerts started hitting their system. Though I have to say, your facility's reporting is inconsistent. I stepped out of the elevator, salt crystals crunching under my feet. What automated alerts? Our monitoring systems are showing green lights while everything down here is dying. Oren held up the device in his hand, a portable water analysis unit that looked far more sophisticated than anything in our standard equipment inventory. This registered the contamination spike from the parking lot. Sodium chloride concentrations that should be impossible in a freshwater treatment facility. He swept the sensor through the air, and I could hear it clicking rapidly. But your facility isn't reporting any of this data to the state monitoring network. Because our systems don't know what they're looking at, I said, leading him toward the primary treatment area. Everything started about 4 hours ago. Salt brine infiltration through a supposedly sealed auxiliary line that someone deliberately opened. As we walked, I noticed Oren's equipment was registering readings that made his face grow progressively more concerned. The clicking from his detector accelerated until it became a steady drone. "Selim, these concentration levels." He stopped walking and checked the device display. "This isn't just contamination. This is like someone pumped concentrated seawater directly into your system." We reached the observation platform overlooking Treatment Bay Alpha. What I'd seen an hour ago had gotten dramatically worse. The 6 primary filtration units were now completely silent, their surfaces so corroded that metal flakes were falling to the floor like industrial snow. The biological treatment tanks showed a thick foam layer on top. The bacterial colonies were not just dying, they were decomposing rapidly in the hypersaline environment. But the worst sight was the control panels. A dozen monitoring stations that should have been flashing red with emergency warnings were instead showing a bizarre mix of normal readings and complete sensor failures. Half the screens displayed sensor error messages, while the others stubbornly insisted everything was operating within normal parameters. "Your monitoring system has been compromised," Oren said, connecting his portable unit to one of the control panels. "Someone's feeding false data to your primary sensors while the real contamination spreads." He typed rapidly on the device. "Look at this, your system thinks it's processing 1.8 million gallons per hour of clean water. In reality, you're processing 0 gallons of anything drinkable." The radio crackled to life. Bellamy's voice, tight with growing panic. "Selim, I'm getting calls from the city water department. Pressure's dropping in the North District, and people are starting to call about discolored water coming from their taps." My stomach dropped. "What kind of discoloration?" "Brownish. Smells bad. They want to know if there's a boil water advisory." I looked at Oren, whose face had gone pale. "If contaminated water is reaching the distribution system, a boil water advisory won't help," he said quietly. "You can't boil out salt concentrations this high. People who drink this will get severe dehydration, kidney stress." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only were we failing to produce clean water, we were actively pumping poison into the municipal supply. Every minute we delayed shutting down the system completely was another few thousand gallons of contaminated water reaching homes, schools, businesses. Bellamy, shut down all outflow to the municipal distribution system immediately. I called into the radio. Emergency isolation protocols. Now, I can't, came the response. The isolation valves aren't responding to remote commands. I'd need someone physically at the main distribution point to close them manually. Oren was already moving toward the service stairs. Distribution control is on level 2, right? I can get there faster then. No. I grabbed his arm. Those valves require two-person authentication. Safety protocol. And besides, I need you here to help figure out how far this contamination has spread. The sound of rushing water drew our attention back to the treatment bay. One of the secondary processing tanks had just ruptured, sending a cascade of salt brine across the floor toward the electrical systems. Sparks started flying from the primary power distribution panel as the conductive salt water reached it. "Everyone out of the treatment bay," I shouted, though we were the only ones down there. "That panel controls the entire facility's power grid." We ran for the emergency stairs as the lights flickered and died behind us. Emergency battery lighting kicked in, casting everything in harsh red shadows. The sound of electrical systems shorting out echoed through the facility like gunshots. On level 2, we found Bellamy standing in front of a bank of manual override controls, his hands shaking as he tried to operate switches that weren't responding. "The electrical surge knocked out half the control systems," he said without looking up. "I can't isolate the distribution lines remotely, and the manual overrides require power we don't have." Through the observation windows, I could see the scope of the disaster expanding. What had started as contamination in Treatment Bay Alpha was now spreading to Bay Beta and Bay Gamma. The salt brine was following the interconnected pipe network like an infection, corroding everything it touched. Crystalline deposits were building up in the pipe junctions, blocking flow and creating pressure buildups that were causing more ruptures. Oren connected his monitoring device to the backup control panel. "I'm reading contamination in the reserve storage tanks too," he said. "The salt water didn't just enter through the auxiliary line. It's been introduced at multiple points in your system." "Multiple points?" Bellamy stopped working on the controls and stared at Oren. "That's not possible. Our intake lines are completely separate systems. Unless someone had access to the facility blueprints and knew exactly where to introduce contamination for maximum spread," Oren replied grimly. "This wasn't random vandalism. This was systematic sabotage by someone who understood your infrastructure." The radio buzzed with an incoming call from the City Emergency Management Office. Bellamy answered with obvious reluctance. "Water treatment facility. This is Supervisor Bellamy." The voice on the other end was sharp with urgency. "Bellamy, we're getting reports of water contamination across 6 districts. How widespread is this problem? And what's your timeline for resolution?" Bellamy looked at me helplessly. I took the radio. "This is Chief Engineer Selim. We have catastrophic system failure due to deliberate sabotage. Current timeline for restoration is unknown. We need to implement citywide water rationing immediately and set up emergency distribution points." A pause. "Then, did you just say sabotage? Are we dealing with a terrorism event?" "I don't know what we're dealing with," I admitted, "but our primary treatment capacity is completely compromised, and contaminated water has already entered the municipal supply." The radio went silent for so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Finally, "We're declaring a municipal emergency. All non-essential water usage is banned immediately. I'm contacting the National Guard for emergency water supplies." As the call ended, Oren showed me his monitoring device. The contamination readings were climbing steadily. "It's not just the salt anymore," he said. "I'm detecting industrial solvents, heavy metals. Whoever did this introduced a cocktail of contaminants that's making everything worse." A new alarm started blaring, not the water treatment alarms, but the building's fire suppression system. Through the windows, I could see thick smoke rising from the electrical systems in Treatment Bay Alpha. The combination of salt water and electrical fires was creating a toxic cloud that would soon make the entire lower level uninhabitable. "We need to evacuate to the emergency command center," Bellamy said, gathering up the control manuals. If the fire spreads to the chemical storage areas, he didn't need to finish. The facility stored chlorine, fluoride compounds, and other treatment chemicals that could create deadly gas clouds if exposed to fire. What had started as water contamination was rapidly becoming a hazmat emergency. As we climbed toward the emergency command center on the top floor, I felt the weight of failure settling on my shoulders like lead. 6 months ago, during the budget hearings, Oren had recommended upgrading our monitoring systems. I'd opposed it, arguing that our existing equipment was adequate. Now those inadequate systems had left us blind while someone destroyed our facility from the inside. But there was something else eating at me. The sabotage was too precise, too well coordinated. Someone had known exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Someone with access to facility blueprints, knowledge of our security protocols, and understanding of our system vulnerabilities. Someone who worked here, or had worked here recently. The emergency command center was a cramped room with backup communication systems and emergency supplies. As we set up Oren's monitoring equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The sabotage, the timing, the systematic nature of the attack, it all suggested planning and inside knowledge. My tablet chimed with another message from the unknown number. "Storage room C7. Look behind the cleaning supplies. Trust no one else." I showed the message to Oren and Bellamy. Anyone know why Delphine would be sending cryptic messages instead of coming forward directly? Bellamy's face went white. Delphine? She's not supposed to be here. Her compliance inspection isn't scheduled until next month. Then how does she know about the facility systems? Oren asked. And why is she communicating like she's afraid to be seen? Through the command center windows, I could see smoke billowing from multiple points in the facility. The fire suppression systems were failing, probably because the electrical systems that controlled them were shorting out in the salt water. Soon, we'd have to evacuate the entire building. But first, I needed to find storage room C7 and discover what Delphine had hidden there, because I was starting to suspect that the sabotage of our water treatment facility was just the beginning of something much worse. The radio crackled with reports of pressure drops spreading to all districts of the city. 180,000 people were about to lose their water supply completely. And somewhere in this dying facility was evidence of who had done this to us and why. Time was running out faster than the water in our storage tanks. The emergency command center felt like the bridge of a sinking ship. Outside the reinforced windows, I could see 3 separate fires burning in different sections of the facility, their smoke creating a toxic haze that was making the lower levels uninhabitable. The acrid smell was seeping through the building's ventilation system, making my eyes water and my throat burn. "Storage room C7 is in the basement maintenance level," Bellamy said, studying the facility blueprint spread across the emergency table. "But that entire section is flooded with brine now. The stairwell access has been compromised since the electrical fires started." Oren looked up from his monitoring station, where readouts showed contamination levels that were climbing beyond what his equipment could measure. Whoever Delphine is, she knew this was coming. These readings suggest the sabotage started at least 12 hours before we detected it. Someone's been planning this attack for days. I stared at the cryptic message on my tablet. Trust no one else. The implications were becoming impossible to ignore. The sabotage wasn't random, it was surgical. Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems had targeted the exact vulnerabilities that would cause maximum damage while keeping us blind to the spreading contamination. "There's another route to C7, I said, tracing my finger along the blueprint. "The service tunnel that runs under the main treatment bays. It connects to the maintenance level through an emergency access shaft. That tunnel floods whenever we have heavy rainfall," Bellamy protested. "With all the brine infiltration, it's our only option." I was already gathering emergency gear from the command center supplies: waterproof flashlights, breathing masks, a portable radio. If Delphine left evidence about who's behind this, we need it now. The city emergency management is talking about bringing in federal investigators. If this is terrorism, they'll lock down the entire facility. Oren's portable detector started clicking rapidly as he swept it across the command center. The contamination is reaching this level too. Salt particles are being carried by the smoke from the fires below. We've got maybe an hour before this entire building becomes uninhabitable. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Emergency command, this is City Water Authority. We're showing complete pressure loss in districts 4 through 9. The distribution pumps are drawing directly from your contaminated output. How long before you can isolate the supply lines? I took the radio. Selim here. The isolation systems are non-functional due to electrical damage. We need to shut down the main distribution pumps from your end immediately. Negative. Those pumps are the only thing maintaining pressure for the fire department's emergency response. We've got structure fires spreading across 6 blocks because of water pressure failures. If we shut down the pumps entirely, the transmission cut off, but the implication was clear. The contaminated water we were pumping was still water. Shutting down completely would leave the fire department with no water at all to fight the spreading fires that were consuming parts of the city. We're trapped, Bellamy said quietly. Keep pumping and we poison more people. Stop pumping and let buildings burn with people inside. Through the observation window, I watched another electrical panel explode in a shower of sparks as salt water reached it. The facility was destroying itself from the inside out, and soon there would be nothing left to save or sabotage. But we still had to try. The service tunnel entrance was accessed through a maintenance hatch in the floor of the loading dock. As I descended the ladder, my headlamp illuminated a narrow concrete corridor that stretched into darkness. The air was thick with humidity and the metallic stench of corroding pipes. Salt crystals had formed on the walls like some kind of underground frost. The tunnel floor was covered with about 6 inches of contaminated water that had seeped through the foundation. Each step sent ripples through the dark liquid, and I could see more salt deposits building up where the water met the concrete walls. The familiar clicking of Oren's detector echoed behind me as he followed. "Contamination levels are off the charts down here," he called out. "Whatever got pumped into your system, it's concentrated in these service areas." Halfway through the tunnel, we found the first piece of evidence that this was deliberate sabotage. A section of the main water line had been deliberately cut open, with a temporary connection spliced in that led to a large plastic drum. The drum was empty now, but residue around the rim showed it had contained something thick and oily. "Industrial solvent," Oren said, testing the residue with a sample kit. "High concentration stuff. This wasn't just salt water. Someone introduced multiple contaminants designed to cause maximum damage to your filtration systems." The emergency access shaft to storage room C7 was a narrow vertical ladder that led up through about 15 feet of corroded concrete. As I climbed, chunks of salt-damaged material fell around me. The air grew thicker and more toxic with each rung. Storage room C7 was a disaster. Half the floor was flooded with brine, and the metal shelving units were so corroded they were falling apart. But behind the cleaning supplies, exactly where Delphine's message had indicated, I found a waterproof document case. Inside were photographs, internal memos, and inspection reports that made my blood run cold. The images showed deliberate modifications to safety systems: bypassed pressure sensors, disabled emergency shutoffs, monitoring equipment that had been reprogrammed to report false data. The modifications weren't recent. Some of the photos were dated 6 months ago, but it was the memos that revealed the real scope of the conspiracy. Internal communications between facility management and a contractor called Meridian Industrial Solutions. The messages detailed a systematic program to cut costs by bypassing safety regulations and disabling monitoring systems that might trigger expensive compliance requirements. One memo, dated 3 weeks ago, was particularly damning. Final phase implementation complete. All monitoring systems redirected through secondary servers. Facility will show green lights regardless of actual conditions. Environmental Compliance Inspector has been rescheduled to avoid detection. At the bottom of the document case was a handwritten note. They're going to blame equipment failure or terrorism. The truth is we've been operating without safety systems for months. When something went wrong, we had no way to detect it until it was too late. Find the Meridian servers in the sub-basement. Get the evidence before they destroy it. Delphine, I photographed everything with my phone before sealing the documents back in their waterproof case. As I climbed back down the access shaft, pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrible clarity. The facility had been secretly operating without functional safety systems for months. When the salt brine infiltration began, whether through accident or deliberate attack, our compromised monitoring systems had hidden the spreading contamination until it reached catastrophic levels. Back in the service tunnel, I found Oren examining another piece of evidence. A section of pipe that had been deliberately weakened with corrosive chemicals. Someone wanted this system to fail catastrophically, he said, but they also wanted it to look like random infrastructure failure. As we made our way back through the flooded tunnel, my radio came alive with frantic transmissions. The contamination had reached the city's main distribution hub, and pressure failures were cascading through the entire municipal water system. Emergency services were reporting that hospitals were switching to bottled water only, and schools across 6 districts were being evacuated as a precautionary measure. But there was more bad news waiting when we reached the command center. Bellamy was standing over the radio with a grim expression. The State Environmental Emergency Team is en route, he said. They're bringing federal investigators and hazmat containment specialists. They want to declare this facility a contaminated site and seal it completely. How long do we have? I asked. 2 hours. Maybe less. I showed him the documents from storage room C7. As he read through them, I watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of hollow despair. We've been operating blind for months, he said finally. Every safety decision, every operational choice. We were making them with false information. Oren was studying the technical specifications in the Meridian documents. These modifications weren't just about cutting costs. They were designed to create exactly the kind of failure we're seeing now. Someone planned this disaster. But why? Bellamy asked. Why destroy a municipal water treatment facility? I thought about the timing, the precision of the attack, the way the sabotage had been designed to look like equipment failure. Maybe the facility was never the real target. Maybe we're just collateral damage in something bigger. My tablet chimed with another message from the unknown number. Meridian servers in sub-basement level 3. Federal investigators will destroy evidence to protect corporate contracts. You have 1 hour. Through the command center windows, I could see emergency vehicles arriving in the parking lot. Hazmat teams in white suits were setting up containment barriers around the facility. Soon, we'd be locked out of our own building while federal investigators controlled what evidence survived and what disappeared. But first, we had to reach sub-basement level 3 and find the Meridian servers. Because I was beginning to understand that the destruction of our water treatment facility wasn't the end goal. It was just the first move in a larger game. And if we didn't get proof of the conspiracy before the federal teams locked down the evidence, the people responsible would disappear behind corporate lawyers and government classifications. The salt brine had destroyed our facility and poisoned our city's water supply. But the real crime was the systematic dismantling of safety systems that had made the disaster inevitable. Someone had spent months preparing our infrastructure to fail catastrophically, and then stepped back to watch it happen. Now I had to decide whether to focus on the immediate crisis of saving what remained of our water treatment capacity, or risk everything to expose the conspiracy that had made this disaster possible. Outside, 180,000 people were facing a water emergency that would last for weeks. Inside, evidence of criminal negligence was about to be sealed away forever. The betrayal wasn't just that someone had sabotaged our facility. The betrayal was that our own management had participated in dismantling the safety systems designed to protect the community we served. We hadn't just failed to stop the disaster, we had unknowingly helped create the conditions that made it inevitable. And somewhere in the sub-basement, locked in corporate servers, was proof that this wasn't the first facility they had targeted, and it wouldn't be the last. The federal hazmat team had cordoned off the facility perimeter with yellow tape and portable barriers, but they hadn't yet entered the building. Through the emergency command center windows, I watched them setting up decontamination stations and mobile laboratories in the parking lot. We had maybe 30 minutes before they sealed us out permanently. Sub-basement level 3 is accessible through the maintenance elevator shaft, I told Oren, spreading the facility's structural blueprints across the table. The salt-corroded edges of the paper crumbled under my fingers. But the elevator system has been offline since the electrical fires started. We'll have to use the emergency ladder access. Bellamy was monitoring radio transmissions from city emergency services, his face growing more haggard with each report. District 7's main distribution pump just failed completely, he announced. That's 43,000 people without any water pressure now. The backup reservoir is down to 18 hours of supply. The gravity of our situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Even if we somehow restored partial filtration capacity, the damage to the distribution system meant that large sections of the city would be without clean water for weeks. The cascading failures had moved beyond our facility and were now tearing through the entire municipal infrastructure. My tablet chimed with another message from Delphine. Meridian servers contain evidence of 12 other facilities. This was a test run. Federal investigators have cleanup contracts with Meridian. Evidence will disappear in 20 minutes. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of a terrible choice settling on my shoulders. We could spend our remaining time trying to jury-rig some kind of minimal water treatment to serve a fraction of the city, or we could risk everything to gather evidence that might prevent this disaster from being repeated in other cities. Oren, I need you to get to the sub-basement and download everything from those servers, I said, handing him a portable storage device. Whatever Meridian was doing here, they've done it before and they'll do it again. He looked at the tablet message, then at the hazmat teams visible through the windows. That's a one-way trip, Selim. If the feds lock down the building while I'm down there, then you'll be trapped with evidence that could save other cities from going through what we're experiencing now. Bellamy overheard our conversation and slammed his hand against the radio console. Are you insane? We have immediate responsibilities here. People are already getting sick from the contaminated water that's still in the distribution lines. Our priority has to be damage control, not some conspiracy investigation. The argument was interrupted by a tremendous cracking sound from somewhere below us. Through the floor, I felt a vibration that seemed to shake the entire building. The emergency lighting flickered, and several monitoring screens went dark permanently. What was that? Oren asked. I consulted the facility status display. Foundation subsidence in the main treatment bay. The salt corrosion has weakened the concrete supports. The building is starting to collapse structurally. As if to emphasize the point, a section of ceiling plaster broke loose and crashed to the floor, leaving a spider web of cracks across the command center's overhead surface. The metallic taste of salt-laden air was getting stronger, making it difficult to breathe without coughing. Bellamy's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Emergency command. This is Fire District 12. We have confirmed structure fires in 17 buildings across the affected water pressure zones. Without adequate water pressure for suppression, we're losing the ability to contain the spread. How long before you can restore at least minimal distribution? I took the radio with hands that were trembling from fatigue and chemical exposure. Fire District 12, this is Selim. Our facility's structural integrity is compromised. We cannot guarantee continued operation of any systems. Understood. Be advised that evacuation orders are being issued for a 6-block radius around your location. The smoke from your facility fires is creating a toxic hazard zone. Through the windows, I could see residents of nearby apartment buildings being escorted away from the area by emergency personnel. The disaster had grown beyond our facility and was now threatening the entire surrounding neighborhood. Soon, the building would be evacuated and we would lose any chance of accessing the Meridian servers. But the choice was being taken away from us by the failing infrastructure. Another section of ceiling collapsed, this time bringing down several light fixtures and exposing corroded metal conduits. Sparks from damaged electrical systems were creating new fire hazards throughout the building. "We need to evacuate," Bellamy said, gathering essential equipment from the command center. "The building is becoming uninhabitable." I looked at Oren, who was staring at the portable storage device I'd given him. The sub-basement was 3 levels below us, accessible only through maintenance shafts that were likely already flooded with toxic brine. It would be a suicide mission under normal circumstances, and these circumstances were far from normal. But as I watched the federal hazmat teams setting up their containment perimeter, I realized that evacuating meant allowing the evidence of Meridian's conspiracy to be destroyed. 12 other facilities, Delphine had said. 12 other cities that could face the same disaster we were experiencing if we didn't expose the systematic sabotage of safety systems. "Bellamy, take the emergency communications gear and relocate to the parking lot command post," I decided. "Coordinate with the federal teams and try to minimize the contamination spread. Focus on protecting the backup water reservoirs." "What about you?" he asked. I picked up my emergency gear and headed toward the maintenance access corridor. "Oren and I are going to the sub-basement. Someone needs to document what really happened here." "Selim, that's not a water treatment decision. That's a suicide decision." He was right, but I was thinking about the 180,000 people who were facing weeks without clean water because someone had systematically disabled our safety systems. I was thinking about 12 other cities where Meridian had conducted similar sabotage operations. I was thinking about the probability that this disaster was just the beginning of something much larger. The maintenance corridor that led to sub-basement level 3 was a maze of corroded pipes and failing electrical systems. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on walls that were streaked with salt deposits and water damage. The air was thick enough to see, and each breath felt like inhaling liquid. "Contamination levels are beyond what my equipment can measure," Oren reported as we descended through the emergency ladder access. "We're getting into concentrations that will cause permanent tissue damage." 3 levels down, we found the Meridian server room behind a door marked "Authorized personnel only." The lock had been corroded away by the salt-laden air, and inside, we discovered a sophisticated computer installation that was still operational despite the facility-wide system failures. "This equipment is isolated from the main facility power grid," Oren observed, connecting his portable storage device to the server array. "They've got independent power supplies and environmental controls. Someone wanted to make sure these servers survived whatever happened to the rest of the building." As the data download began, I explored the rest of the server room. Filing cabinets contained physical documentation of Meridian's operations in other cities: Denver, Phoenix, Nashville, Seattle. Each facility had undergone the same systematic dismantling of safety systems, followed by catastrophic failures that were blamed on equipment age or terrorist attacks. But it was the timeline documents that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Meridian Industrial Solutions was a front company for a larger organization that was testing vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure systems. The water treatment facilities were just the beginning. They had similar operations planned for power grids, transportation networks, and communication systems. The data download was taking longer than expected, and I could hear the sound of failing structure throughout the building. Support beams were cracking under the stress of salt corrosion and foundation subsidence. We had minutes, not hours, before the entire facility became uninhabitable. "Downloads at 60%, Oren reported. "But I'm seeing evidence of remote deletion protocols. Someone's trying to wipe these servers from an external location." I found the manual override controls for the server room's environmental systems and disabled the remote access capabilities. If Meridian wanted to destroy the evidence, they would have to do it physically. But that meant we were racing against both structural collapse and whoever was monitoring these servers remotely. At 75% completion, the building shook with another massive structural failure. Through the server room's ventilation system, I could smell smoke from new fires that were spreading through the upper levels. The facility was destroying itself around us, but we were so close to getting the evidence that could prevent this disaster from being repeated. The download completed just as the emergency lighting in the server room began to flicker and fail. I helped Oren disconnect his storage device and pack the physical documents we'd found. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the server array that contained evidence of a conspiracy spanning multiple cities and years of preparation. The climb back to ground level was a nightmare of corroded ladders and toxic air. By the time we reached the main floor, the building was being evacuated by federal emergency teams. Smoke from electrical fires had filled most of the corridors, and structural damage was visible throughout the facility. But we had the evidence. Hidden in Oren's portable storage device was documentation of systematic infrastructure sabotage that went far beyond our water treatment facility. The question now was whether we could get that evidence to investigators who weren't part of the cover-up, and whether we could do it before Meridian realized their servers had been compromised. Outside, Bellamy was coordinating with federal hazmat teams who were establishing a wide contamination zone around the entire facility. Emergency vehicles stretched for blocks in every direction, and I could see news helicopters circling overhead. The disaster had become a national story, which meant that both evidence and cover-up would be operating under intense public scrutiny. The federal investigators want to interview everyone who was inside the facility during the incident, Bellamy reported when he saw us emerging from the building. They're particularly interested in how the sabotage was discovered and what documentation exists. I looked at Oren, who was carrying the storage device containing evidence that could implicate federal contractors in the disaster. We had to decide immediately whether to trust the official investigation or find alternative channels for exposing what we'd discovered. The choice was made for us when I spotted a familiar figure among the federal investigators. A woman in a hazmat suit whose name tag read, Dr. Sarah Martinez, Meridian Industrial Solutions, Environmental Compliance Specialist. Meridian wasn't just covering up the evidence. They were part of the official investigation team. The federal hazmat team had cordoned off the facility perimeter with yellow tape and portable barriers, but through the command center windows I could see they were still setting up decontamination stations rather than entering. We had maybe 20 minutes before they sealed us out permanently. Sub-basement level 3, I said, spreading the corroded facility blueprints across the table. Salt deposits had eaten through the paper edges, making them crumble at my touch. The maintenance elevator's been dead since the electrical fires started. We'll need the emergency ladder access. Bellamy monitored city emergency frequencies, his face growing more gaunt with each transmission. District 7's main distribution pump just failed, he announced. 43,000 people without water pressure. Backup reservoir down to 16 hours. Even if we restored partial filtration, the distribution system damage meant weeks without clean water for vast sections of the city. The cascade had moved beyond our facility, tearing through municipal infrastructure like an infection. My tablet chimed with another message from Delphine. Meridian servers contain evidence of 12 other facilities. This was a test run. Federal investigators have cleanup contracts with Meridian. Evidence will disappear in 17 minutes. The weight of impossible choice settled on my shoulders. We could spend our remaining time jury-rigging minimal water treatment for a fraction of the city, or risk everything to gather evidence that might prevent this disaster from being repeated elsewhere. Oren, I need you to reach the sub-basement and download everything from those servers, I said, handing him a portable storage device. Whatever Meridian was doing here, they've done it before. He studied Delphine's message, then glanced at the hazmat teams outside. That's a one-way trip, Selim. If they lock down the building while I'm down there, then you'll be trapped with evidence that could save other cities from what we're experiencing. Bellamy overheard our conversation and slammed his hand against the radio console. Are you insane? We have immediate responsibilities here. People are already getting sick from contaminated water still in the distribution lines. Our priority has to be damage control, not some conspiracy investigation. A tremendous cracking sound echoed from somewhere below us. Through the floor, I felt a vibration that seemed to shake the entire building. The emergency lighting flickered, and several monitoring screens went dark permanently. Foundation subsidence in the main treatment bay. I read from the facility status display. Salt corrosion has compromised the concrete supports. The building's collapsing structurally. Ceiling plaster crashed down, leaving a spider web of cracks overhead. The metallic taste of salt-laden air was getting stronger, making each breath a struggle. Bellamy's radio crackled. Emergency command. This is Fire District 12. We have structure fires in 19 buildings across affected zones. Without water pressure for suppression, we're losing containment. How long before minimal distribution? I took the radio with trembling hands. Fire District 12, this is Selim. Our facility's structural integrity is compromised. We cannot guarantee continued operation. Understood. Evacuation orders issued for 6-block radius. Smoke from your facility is creating a toxic hazard zone. Through the windows, I watched residents being escorted from nearby apartments. The disaster had grown beyond our facility, threatening the entire neighborhood. Soon we'd be evacuated and lose any chance at the Meridian servers. Another ceiling section collapsed, bringing down light fixtures and exposing corroded conduits. Sparks from damaged electrical systems created new fire hazards throughout the building. We need to evacuate, Bellamy said, gathering essential equipment. The building's becoming uninhabitable. I looked at Oren, who stared at the storage device I'd given him. Subbasement level 3 was accessible only through maintenance shafts likely flooded with toxic brine. A suicide mission under any circumstances. But watching the federal teams establish their containment perimeter, I realized evacuating meant allowing Meridian's evidence to be destroyed. 12 other facilities. 12 cities facing the same disaster if we didn't expose the systematic safety sabotage. Bellamy, take emergency communications and relocate to the parking lot command post. I decided. Coordinate with federal teams, minimize contamination spread. Focus on protecting backup reservoirs. What about you? I grabbed my gear and headed toward the maintenance corridor. Oren and I are going to subbasement. Someone needs to document what really happened. Selim, that's not a treatment decision. That's a suicide decision. He was right. But I thought about 180,000 people facing weeks without clean water because someone systematically disabled our safety systems. 12 other cities where Meridian conducted similar operations. This disaster might be just the beginning. The maintenance corridor leading to subbasement level 3 was a maze of corroded pipes and failing electrical systems. Emergency lighting cast twisted shadows on walls streaked with salt deposits. The air was thick enough to see, each breath like inhaling syrup. Contamination beyond what my equipment can measure, Oren reported as we descended the emergency ladder. We're hitting concentrations that cause permanent tissue damage. 3 levels down, we found the server room behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Salt corrosion had eaten the lock away. Inside, sophisticated computer installations still operational despite facility-wide failures. This equipment's isolated from main facility power, Oren observed, connecting his storage device to the server array. Independent power and environmental controls. Someone wanted these servers to survive whatever happened to the building. While data downloaded, I explored filing cabinets containing physical documentation of Meridian operations. Denver, Phoenix, Nashville, Seattle. Each facility had undergone identical systematic safety dismantling, followed by catastrophic failures blamed on equipment age or terrorism. Timeline documents revealed the conspiracy's true scope. Meridian Industrial Solutions fronted for a larger organization testing critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. Water treatment was just the beginning, similar operations planned for power grids, transportation networks, communication systems. The download was taking longer than expected. I could hear structural failure throughout the building, support beams cracking from salt corrosion and foundation subsidence. We had minutes before the facility became completely uninhabitable. Download at 60%, Oren reported. But I'm seeing remote deletion protocols. Someone's trying to wipe these servers externally. I found manual override controls and disabled remote access. If Meridian wanted evidence destroyed, they'd have to do it physically. But now we raced both structural collapse and whoever monitored these servers remotely. At 75%, the building shook with massive structural failure. Through ventilation, I smelled smoke from fires spreading through upper levels. The facility destroyed itself around us, but we were close to evidence that could prevent disaster repetition. Download completed as emergency lighting flickered and failed. I helped Oren disconnect his device and pack physical documents. Taking one last look at servers containing evidence of multi-city, multi-year conspiracy, I felt the full weight of what we'd discovered. The climb to ground level was nightmare. Corroded ladders, toxic air. Reaching the main floor, federal teams were evacuating the building. Smoke from electrical fires filled corridors, structural damage visible throughout. But we had evidence. Hidden in Oren's device, documentation of systematic infrastructure sabotage far beyond our facility. The question was whether we could get it to investigators not part of the cover-up before Meridian realized their servers were compromised. Outside, Bellamy coordinated with hazmat teams establishing wide contamination zones. Emergency vehicles stretched for blocks, news helicopters circling overhead. National story now, both evidence and cover-up operating under intense public scrutiny. Federal investigators want to interview everyone inside during the incident, Bellamy reported when he saw us emerge. They're particularly interested in sabotage discovery and existing documentation. I looked at Oren carrying the storage device that could implicate federal contractors. We had to decide immediately, trust official investigation or find alternative channels. The choice was made when I spotted a familiar figure among federal investigators. A woman in hazmat gear whose name tag read, Dr. Sarah Martinez, Meridian Industrial Solutions, Environmental Compliance Specialist. Meridian wasn't just covering up evidence. They were part of the official investigation team. I caught Oren's eye and nodded toward the parking lot's far edge, away from the federal command post. We had evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching into government agencies, but we were surrounded by the very people we needed to investigate. The metallic taste in my mouth was getting worse, and I could feel salt crystals forming in my lungs with each breath. We were all suffering from prolonged chemical exposure, but the evidence we'd gathered might be our only chance to prevent other cities from experiencing this catastrophe. As we walked toward the contamination perimeter, I realized our choice in the server room had sealed our fate. We'd chosen to expose the conspiracy over attempting futile water system repairs, but now we had to survive long enough to get that evidence to someone who could act on it. The building behind us groaned with another structural collapse. Soon there would be nothing left of the facility except rubble and toxic waste. But hidden in Oren's storage device was proof that this disaster was neither accident nor isolated incident. It was a test run for something much worse. The emergency broadcast van's generator hummed behind the contamination perimeter as I connected Oren's storage device to their transmission equipment. Channel 7's investigative reporter had agreed to go live with our evidence after I'd convinced him that Meridian personnel were embedded in the federal response team. 30 seconds to broadcast, the reporter announced, adjusting his hazmat suit's communication system. Behind us, the water treatment facility continued its death throes. Another section of the main building collapsed with a thunderous crash that shook the ground beneath our feet. Through the van's windows, I could see Dr. Martinez and other Meridian personnel moving through the federal command post, examining evidence bags and interviewing witnesses. Every minute we delayed gave them more time to control the narrative and destroy remaining proof. This is live television, the reporter warned. Once we broadcast this evidence, there's no taking it back. Are you certain about what you're alleging? I looked at Oren, who was monitoring his tablet for any signs that Meridian had discovered their servers were compromised. Salt crystals had formed around his eyes from prolonged chemical exposure, and his breathing was labored. We were all suffering from the toxic environment, but the evidence we'd gathered represented the only chance to prevent this disaster from being repeated in other cities. 12 facilities, I said, reviewing the downloaded documents one final time. Denver, Phoenix, Nashville, Seattle, all experienced identical safety system failures after Meridian conducted infrastructure assessments. This wasn't terrorism or equipment failure. It was systematic sabotage disguised as compliance consulting. The reporter nodded and signaled his cameraman. We're live in 5, 4, 3. As the red recording light activated, I felt the weight of everything we discovered settling on my shoulders. Behind us, the facility that had served our city for 30 years was destroying itself from salt corrosion and structural collapse. Ahead of us, the federal investigators included the very people responsible for the disaster. This is Channel 7 reporting live from the contaminated water treatment facility disaster. The reporter began. With me is Chief Engineer Selim, who has evidence suggesting this catastrophe was not accidental. I held up the printed documents we'd retrieved from subbasement level 3. 6 months ago, Meridian Industrial Solutions conducted a safety compliance assessment of our facility. Their recommendations systematically disabled our emergency protocols and contamination barriers. When the salt brine infiltration occurred, we had no functioning safeguards. Through the van's rear window, I saw Dr. Martinez suddenly look up from the federal command post, her attention drawn to our broadcast equipment. She began moving rapidly toward our location, speaking urgently into her radio. The downloaded files contained communication records proving Meridian knew these modifications would create catastrophic vulnerabilities. I continued, racing against time as Martinez approached. They've done this in at least 11 other cities. This was a test run for something larger. Chun pressed the key question. What about the current water crisis? How many people are affected? The truth was harder than any technical explanation. Our distribution system is compromised throughout the city. Even if we could restore full treatment capacity immediately, the salt brine contamination has damaged pipes and pumps across 6 districts. Conservative estimate: 180,000 people without reliable clean water for 6 to 8 weeks. A tremendous crash echoed as the facility's main treatment building finally collapsed completely. Toxic smoke billowed from the wreckage, forcing even the federal teams to retreat to wider perimeters. The infrastructure that had served our community was gone, reduced to salt-corroded rubble and chemical contamination. Dr. Martinez from Meridian Industrial Solutions is approaching our location, the reporter observed, tracking her movement through his viewfinder. Should we get her response to these allegations? Before I could answer, Martinez reached our van. Even through her hazmat gear, I could see her expression of barely controlled panic. This broadcast needs to stop immediately, she demanded. You're interfering with an ongoing federal investigation and spreading unsubstantiated conspiracy theories during a public health emergency. I held up the storage device containing the downloaded evidence. These are Meridian's own documents, Dr. Martinez. Timeline records, facility assessments, communication logs. Would you like to explain why your company systematically disabled safety systems in 12 different cities? Those documents are classified federal infrastructure information, she responded. Possessing them is a felony. I'm ordering this broadcast terminated. The reporter stepped between us, maintaining his camera angle. This is a public health emergency with national implications. The public has a right to know if systematic sabotage caused this disaster. Martinez spoke into her radio. Command, we have unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Request immediate shutdown of broadcasting equipment and detention of personnel. Through the van's windows, I watched federal agents begin moving toward our location. We had minutes before they seized the evidence and shut down our broadcast. The conspiracy reached high enough in government that official channels were compromised. Oren, upload everything to the cloud servers. I ordered. Multiple platforms, maximum distribution. His fingers moved rapidly across his tablet despite the salt crystal buildup around his eyes. Uploading to news networks, government transparency sites, social media platforms. They can't stop all of it. The van's generator sputtered as federal agents reached our perimeter. The reporter continued his broadcast even as official vehicles surrounded us. We're witnessing what appears to be an active cover-up of systematic infrastructure sabotage. Federal agents are moving to shut down this broadcast. I made one final statement directly to the camera. The evidence is being distributed to multiple independent sources. Meridian Industrial Solutions has compromised federal infrastructure in at least 12 cities. This disaster was preventable, and stopping the investigation will only enable future attacks. Federal agents reached the van as the cameraman continued recording through the rear window. Martinez personally disconnected our broadcasting equipment, but the upload was already complete. The evidence was distributed beyond their ability to contain. As they escorted us toward the detention area, I looked back at the destroyed facility one final time. The building that had served our community for 3 decades was gone, reduced to toxic rubble. The salt brine that had infiltrated our systems continued eating away at underground infrastructure, ensuring weeks of contamination and system failures. But the evidence was public now. Within hours, news networks across the country would be examining Meridian's documents, investigating the pattern of systematic sabotage, demanding congressional hearings. The conspiracy that had destroyed our facility would face the scrutiny it had tried so hard to avoid. 3 days later, sitting in the federal detention facility, I watched congressional testimony on the communal television. Whistleblowers from Phoenix and Denver were corroborating our evidence, describing identical Meridian operations in their cities. The conspiracy was unraveling under national attention. Bellamy visited during authorized hours, updating me on the city's recovery efforts. Temporary water distribution points are operational, but quality is inconsistent. We're trucking clean water from neighboring counties, but capacity is maybe 20% of normal demand. Hospitals are rationing usage, and 3 industrial facilities have suspended operations. The human cost was staggering. Our choice to expose the conspiracy instead of attempting immediate repairs had saved future cities from similar disasters, but it meant accepting that our community would suffer for weeks from contaminated infrastructure. Any word on prosecutions? I asked. Justice Department opened investigations into Meridian and their federal contacts. Martinez and 6 other personnel are facing federal charges. But reconstruction of the water system will take 18 months minimum, assuming full funding approval. Through the detention facility windows, I could see news helicopters still circling the contaminated facility site. Our disaster had become a national story, forcing examination of infrastructure vulnerability and corporate corruption that reached into federal agencies. 2 weeks later, released pending investigation, I stood at the contamination perimeter, watching demolition crews clear the last remnants of the treatment facility. Salt corrosion had been so extensive that every piece of equipment was unsalvageable. The entire system required complete reconstruction. Oren joined me at the fence, still recovering from chemical exposure. Congressional hearings scheduled next month. They want our testimony about Meridian's operations and the systematic sabotage pattern. I nodded, tasting the lingering metallic residue that still coated my mouth despite weeks of medical treatment. The salt crystals in my lungs would cause permanent respiratory issues, a reminder of our time in the contaminated facility. Any regrets about the choice we made? Oren asked. I considered the question while watching families collect rationed water from emergency distribution trucks. Our evidence had prevented similar disasters in other cities and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. But our community would live with contaminated infrastructure and unreliable water service for months. We saved other cities from experiencing what we're going through, I said finally. But we couldn't save our own people from the immediate crisis. That's something I'll carry forever. Delphine approached from the emergency command post, where she'd been coordinating with federal investigators. Justice Department confirmed that Meridian was contracted to assess infrastructure vulnerability for national security purposes. But instead of reporting weaknesses, they were systematically creating them. The full scope of betrayal was still emerging. What had appeared to be corporate negligence was actually systematic infrastructure sabotage, possibly funded by foreign interests seeking to test American vulnerability. Our facility had been deliberately destroyed as part of a broader operation against critical national infrastructure. Bellamy's been asked to head the reconstruction project, Delphine continued. Federal funding approved for complete system rebuild with enhanced security protocols. Estimated completion, 2 years. 2 years without reliable municipal water service. 2 years of trucked water, rationing, and health risks from inconsistent treatment. The price of exposing the conspiracy was measured in the suffering of everyone who depended on our facility. But as I watched congressional hearings on my phone, seeing Meridian executives facing federal charges and infrastructure security protocols being completely redesigned, I knew we'd made the right choice. The conspiracy we'd exposed had targeted critical infrastructure in dozens of cities. Our sacrifice had prevented a national catastrophe. The metallic taste in my mouth would never fully disappear, and the salt crystals in my lungs would cause health issues for the rest of my life. Oren's chemical exposure had permanently damaged his respiratory system. We'd all carry physical reminders of our time in the contaminated facility. But looking at the emergency water distribution trucks serving our community, I felt a complex mixture of guilt and purpose. We'd failed to save our own people from immediate suffering, but we'd prevented systematic destruction of infrastructure across the nation. The victory was as bitter as the salt that had destroyed our facility, but it was still a victory. The conspiracy was exposed, the perpetrators faced justice, and other cities would be protected from the systematic sabotage that had devastated our community. The water treatment facility was gone, reduced to contaminated rubble that would require years to clean up and rebuild. But the evidence we'd gathered would protect infrastructure for decades to come, preventing future disasters through the painful lesson of our own catastrophic loss.